Of The Face of an Angel, Michael Winterbottom. Michael, welcome to the Apple Store, and thank you very much for coming here to talk about The Face of an Angel tonight. We've got about half an hour to talk about the film. We're going to see a couple of clips from the film as well, and we're keen to take questions from you at the end as well, so please do think of anything you'd like to ask Michael about the film. A quick further introduction to our guest, Michael Winterbottom. As I said, he's the director of The Face of an Angel. His previous films as director include The Look of Love, Cock and Bull Story, The Trip, and The Trip to Italy, which were both films and TV series, depending on where you were living or where you were watching it. 24-Hour Party People, Wonderland, and Welcome to Sarajevo. Quite a lot of films there, but not all your films. Certainly not an exhaustive. You've been making films since the early 90s, late 80s, early 90s.
Like films from like mid 90s, but TV before that.
Excellent. I think you probably get a sense from that short filmography there. I mean, you are someone who I think relatively makes lots of films, and I see you as someone who makes films with minimum fuss. I mean, you like to respond, react, be quick, and be agile in the films that you make. I mean, here you are with The Face of an Angel responding, indirectly to a fairly recent news story. Would you say that reflects your general desire to develop films relatively quickly, to be connected to the world around you, make timely work, be agile, be relevant?
Yeah, although it's also true that I think Kate Beckinsale's character is based on a real journalist, American journalist, and I met her 4.5 years ago. So it's not been that quick. 4.5 years is like it depends how you look at it, but it's most films take quite a long time to come to fruition. So although I tend to make a film a year, it doesn't mean to say you started it that year. You often started it several years earlier.
Could we just touch a little bit on that introduction you said there? You said it's based on it began as an adaptation or was inspired by a book about the case in Perugia. Did you begin by meeting that journalist, having a conversation with that journalist before really knowing what kind of film you were going to make?
Yeah, I mean, I'd read the book. I mean, it's not really based on a book. It's because Barbie's book is an account of the murder and the investigation and the first trial. So then I went to meet Barbie, and I thought she was an interesting character and a way of looking at the press and media coverage of that story. So that was the starting point. But within the film kind of keeps, the idea is anyway, the film keeps evolving. Like Danny Boyle's character is trying to think about what story to tell. So you get sort of 10 minutes of a story about the press, then something about the investigation, something about the trial, and then I hope by the end, it's what the film is about. The really simple and obvious fact that the whole thing should be about, but often gets lost, which is like a girl was killed. A girl who had all her life in front of her was killed. The family lost their daughter, lost their sister, and I hope the film kind of finally comes to quite a quiet point where that's what you think about.
Did you said you went to meet the journalist Barbie, whose book, as you said there, it's not based on, but kind of inspired or kicked off your train of thought towards making this film. When you went to meet her in Rome, is that where you had the chance to meet other journalists who were covering that case? And was the trial actually live then? Was it happening? I mean, did you get to experience the press covering that trial in a way that then influenced the film itself?
Yeah, I mean, Barbie was incredibly generous for the time. So I met her and I thought she'd be an interesting character to put into the film. And then she introduced us to all the other English language journalists and some of the Italian journalists who'd been covering the case. So they all knew each other really well. They'd been covering the story already for 2 years. And we had a dinner, a little bit like a dinner in the film, where they all sat around. Half of them thought the accused were innocent, half thought they were guilty. And then Barbie took me up to Perugia where the trial was happening, and we met the prosecutor and various other people. So it was it began there, and really our films, the chronology of the kind of present day in our film is from the beginning of the appeal trial, which is where we kind of arrived in a way. So we saw the beginning of the appeal trial, and our film goes from the beginning of the appeal trial to the end. But as I say, it's not really about the trial in the end. It's like that is the story they're covering, but it's more about the other kind of characters around that trial.
As you said earlier, I mean, the film does take various vantage points on this case, partly the press, and very, very importantly, respecting the memory of the murdered character in the film, who's obviously an indirect representation of Meredith Kercher as well. But at the heart of the film, it's also a story of a filmmaker who's trying to work out how to tell the story around this murder case. When did that emerge? That there'd be a filmmaker? I mean, it's not too crude to say, kind of an alter ego of yourself, or a representation of yourself, considering how to make this sort of story? When did that emerge as a natural way or the right way to do it?
That came quite early on. I think the initial outline I did, it was like that was the idea. And then, to be honest, we then spent a bit of time going away from that backwards and forwards, whether the central character should be the journalist or someone exploring that world. And I kind of felt it was important that, you know, a filmmaker making a film about that sort of story is in quite a similar place to a journalist. And it kind of felt to me, if we just made it about a journalist, it would look like we thought we were separate, and this is like, that we are doing something different to them. This is an attack on journalism and the way the media behaves. But obviously, we're part of the media, so I kind of that was really the starting point of why he should be there. That he's just as compromised as everyone else. He behaves just as badly as anyone else. He's just as weak as anyone else. And just to kind of like to acknowledge that we are involved in the same business as the journalists. Because I think one problem with journalism is it slags off everyone else, it exposes everyone else's weaknesses, but rarely reminds you as you're reading the article about the politician's indiscretion that the journalist might well have been doing something equally as bad the night before as well.
Unless they're writing about another newspaper.
Yeah. But I mean, for me, the central thing about Thomas, Daniel Bruhl's character, it's not that he's a filmmaker, but he's a father. He's a father. He's got a young daughter who's 9 years old. He's separate from her because he's separate from the mum. And so his love for his daughter is absent is what connects him to the story. And what the film, I hope, is about is more about that kind of love for someone rather than it being about the filmmaking process.
We're going to see a clip in a second. Before we do, I'd like to bring in discussion about the writer, Paul Vera. And Paul Vera is the screenwriter of the film, but it sounds like it very much originated initially with your desire, your thoughts around this case. So at what point did Paul come in, and then how did you work together on it?
I think I read the book. I went to meet Barbie first of all by myself, and I think the first trip up to Perugia was just me and Barbie and so on. And then there was a kind of like, okay, I felt like, okay, there's something interesting there. And at that point, there's like a little outline of what I thought was interesting. At that point, talked to Paul about it, and from then on we worked together. So there was a bit of a kind of, for the first kind of year, like there was a bit of a kind of debate about should Thomas be a writer or a director. So in the end, like we had a kind of like vague, he's a filmmaker, he's a writer and a director. So it's like it's with any film, it's a collaboration. Whether you're collaborating with the writer or with the people it's based on, whether it's with the actors, the cameraman, it's like you sort of it's a sort of you're working together. That's part of the fun of films, and it's not like that's their bit, that's your bit. It's a kind of process, and you end up with something that hopefully you all feel is part of yours.
Very early on, did you decide that it would be sensible and or right to not to call the characters Meredith and Amanda, not to set it in Perugia, but to move the real case, the real story, slightly to the left of reality?
Yeah, I mean that's something we talked about a lot as it wasn't as though that was one decision and we never talked about it. But from the beginning, I felt that because we knew there would be fictional elements to the story, fictional characters, that it would be wrong that if all the journalists have fictional names, but the people the girl who'd been killed or the accused had real names, that was kind of mixed with the real names and the fictional seemed to be wrong. And so I mean, in the end, all the facts of the case, all the facts of the trial are exactly as accurate as if we had kept their names. It's not. We're not trying to pretend it's not the story based on Meredith Kercher's murder, but it just felt to me that I want it to be a parallel world. It'd be wrong to have these fictional things going on around. It just the transition between the fiction and reality would be wrong, I thought.
Did you meet any opposition along the way? I mean, from the justice system, from the government, from obviously the families and people involved?
No, I think we were all nervous of the subject, and realised there were lots of kind of difficult areas. I mean, the most difficult area from my point of view was the Kercher family. I think one of the starting points was that they behaved with a huge amount of dignity through the whole process of the trials and stayed away from the media scrum. So it wasn't like we were trying to like engage with them and like rope them in, because clearly that's one of the things they hadn't done. But at the same time, another motivation had been that they did go to Perugia, and whenever they were there for the key moments, they were like, we're here because we want Meredith to be remembered. And I kind of hope that the film does try and remember Meredith specifically, but also there's lots of stories like this where the victim disappears. So Lyle Kercher, Meredith's brother, was like their sort of representative dealing with the media. So we let him know what was happening, and then in the end we showed him the film, and he felt it was a kind of appropriate way of remembering Meredith. So we put a dedication to Meredith at the end of the film, which of course we wouldn't have done if they felt it wasn't the right thing.
Yeah, but we're going to see a clip now. The clip we're going to see involves the filmmaker character Thomas, played by Daniel Bruhl. He's in the car with a character called Melanie, who we haven't spoken about yet, but we'll talk about afterwards, played by Cara Delevingne. So if we can see that clip, please. Thank you. anyone that's seen The Trip to Italy will know that you're not unfamiliar with connecting driving scenes in the Italian landscape with character and story.
It's true.
Do you have any particular I mean, just curious, this sideways question, but I know you made Genoa in Italy, and you made The Trip to Italy, and then you made this. Any particular interest in Italian culture? Do you think that's in the background?
I mean, it's not the reason I made this film, but yeah, I mean, I spend quite a lot of time in Italy, but so I go there quite often. But it's incidental to all those films.
No, of course.
Yeah.
Real question about the character Melanie we see there, played by Cara Delevingne. I mean, she's someone who Thomas meets while in Siena, while thinking about making the film. She's a character who works behind a bar in Siena. I mean, she's full of life and youth, and you can probably pick up on this more than I can describe it. But essentially, she represents the youthful spirit of the murdered girl that's disappeared, and in a way reintroduces the idea of the absent character to us, the murdered girl.
Exactly, you explain it perfectly. I mean, she's a student. She's a student there for a year, and she's working in a bar. So she's very similar to the characters in our film, Elizabeth and Jessica, who are like the kind of Meredith and Amanda characters. And a lot of the film is about love for people who aren't there, love for people you're separated from. So the idea of Melanie is that she's the one person in the film who reminds Thomas of his daughter, reminds him of the girls he's trying to make the film about, and reminds him also that life's enjoyable. The idea of her, that she's a sort of modern day Beatrice. She's like sort of someone that you can kind of he likes in a kind of very simple kind of way, and reminds him that life is worth living, that life's fun, especially when you're young.
It also something about their relationship. And it should say it's not a romantic relationship in any traditional sense at all. But there's something about their relationship that reflects on his own, if not failings, but struggles with being a parent as well, I think.
Yeah, I mean, he's the idea of Thomas is lost. He's in a crisis because he's got a crisis at work because he hasn't made a film for a long time. He's got a crisis because his daughter is in LA with his wife, who's an actress who's successful, and he feels he can't work there, so he doesn't know where to be there, to be near or not. So he has this kind of crisis, and he's like spends most of the film in the alleyways of Siena, being physically and spiritually lost, and then when he meets her, kind of finally when they get out of Siena, he realizes he should go back to his daughter. So she has that kind of role. But I think also one thing as well for me is that I think part of the problem with the media spending so much time covering violence, spending so much time covering crime, is that it kind of makes you feel like, oh my God, everything's dangerous, everything's bad, you should be suspicious, you should always suspect the worst. And like Melanie is like incredibly open. She just goes, she enjoys things. She's trusting. She just, she's immediately kind of befriends Thomas. She assumes that the best motives of people, and I think, and that is what I find really attractive about her as a character. I think that is how we should behave. That even if bad things happen sometimes, most times good things happen, and unless you're willing to be open like that, you miss out on all the good things.
This idea of us always expecting the worst and being attracted to violence. I mean, at one point in the film, the story does kind of lead us towards a character who seems suspicious, or certainly seems suspicious in Thomas's eyes. And I don't know, won't say any more than that. But were you in some ways trying to play with, the audience's sort of need to have a culprit, need to have a solution, or need to suspect?
I guess it's partly about what the audience expects from a film, what kind of narrative you expect, and in this film it kind of fairly consciously keeps shifting every sort of 10 minutes or so what kind of narrative it might be. So it is a narrative about a murder case, it's a narrative about media, and then it goes into a darker area. So like he has like nightmares which are kind of based on Dante, then he has these kind of paranoid fantasies about what's going on in Siena, so it kind of literally keeps shifting. But I think it also felt appropriate to character. Like it felt that kind of paranoia of Thomas felt like appropriate to his character. And I think probably in general it kind of reflected one of the things that I think was interesting about the trial is because there were characters in it or people in it from Italy and America and Britain. You saw the way the media kind of creates a kind of media sort of creates a story specific to its own audience. So one of the things was like all the American press would be like the Italian system's corrupt. It's that's why it's a wrong verdict. And I think when you're abroad, you're in a strange place, that you easily get this kind of paranoia and put on your fears of something different onto wherever you happen to be.
And you turn there's a short section of the film where you turn Siena into a fairly kind of gothic nighttime nightmare as well. But that's very much reflecting Thomas's kind of the depths of Thomas's paranoia and crisis, isn't it?
Yeah, because Siena is a beautiful place, but I mean, it has that potential as well. And I mean, I guess everywhere has that potential. So it's partly Thomas's subjective kind of his own crisis is that's projected onto Siena. But I have to say there are elements of those Italian towns that are very beautiful in summer that when you're there in winter are slightly more dark and forbidding.
And it might not look like it from the outside, but it's actually a film in which you somehow manage unsuccessfully to have a CGI creature during the nighttime scenes in Siena. But maybe we shouldn't talk any more about that, because if you haven't seen the film, it will make no sense whatsoever. We're going to see a second and final clip. Just before we do, the clip we just saw there, obviously we see Cara Delevingne playing Melanie. Fairly noteworthy in terms of her casting in the film. This is somebody she is a model, is also now acting as well. How did she simple question really, how did she end up in the film, or how did you end up casting her?
I'd met lots of people for the part. Her role, as we were saying, is like a student, kind of wanted someone very open and natural, and that you kind of felt was really like spontaneous. And I met lots of good actors, but I hadn't really found the person I thought was right. And then someone in our office said, you should meet this person. I didn't know who she was, and she came in, and she'd like just flown in overnight from some glamorous location, but was like, despite that, was like full of energy and seemed to me exactly the right person for the film.
Actually, I mean, she is. You said the word natural there. I mean, she's a very natural presence in the film.
Yeah, but what's good, I think, is that when you watch it, it looks like she's just hanging, being herself, maybe emphasizing, but actually it's quite scripted, So she was actually able to take the script and then make it kind of hers, And she's working, Valerio Mastandrea is in the film, is a top Italian actor, won Best Actor last year in Italy, and Daniel Bruhl is a top German actor, and they not only did is she great with them, but they love working with her. I mean, she's really a proper actor. It's not just like, we just kind of told her to do what you want to do and we filmed her.
Yeah, excellent. Well, we're going to see a second and final clip. This clip sees the filmmaker Thomas, played by Daniel Bruhl, talking with a group of journalists, I think in Italy, in Siena. One of the things that scene deals, pretty directly with is, indirectly in terms of different character, different names. The fact that this whole case, the murder of Meredith Kercher, probably became more known as the Amanda Knox case, or the Amanda Knox story, Foxy Knoxy, and the headlines were focused on her. Did you have conversations with journalists about that, about how that had come to pass, how she'd become the story rather than the murder victim?
Yeah, absolutely. And I met all the journalists, the English language journalists, like who in a way that group are based on the Italian journalists covering the case, and they've all seen the film. They all kind of feel like it's a pretty fair representation of what happened. I think journalism is a hugely important job, and most journalists, very intelligent, clever people, go in because you want to communicate what's going on in the world. And it's everything, not everything, but like probably 99% of everything we think we know about the world is because we've seen it on TV or read it in the newspapers. So it's massively important about having journalism that deals with important issues and deals honestly with them. And that it's like there's lots of debates in the film. It's not like there's a clear-cut right and wrong, but I think a lot of the journalists were aware that they were turning the story into a soap opera. That's what the editors wanted. That's how you got it. That's how you sold the story. And that obviously is because they think that's what we all want. That we're all implicated in this. It's not as though the journalists are writing all this, but none of us are reading it or none of us are watching it. We're all watching and reading it as well.
And you could be mistaken seeing that scene to thinking that the film's about a crusading filmmaker, fighting against the press. I mean, it's much more complicated than that.
Yeah, right? And also, the idea is like when you watch the film that Thomas is it's not like Thomas is a good guy and everyone else is a bad guy. So that Thomas has some opinions which change during the film, and other people put alternative opinions, and it's a bit of a debate. And you can think for yourself, like, there's no right or wrong. You can think for yourself, well, what is right and what is the what should you do and what should you do? And it's like all the. All the journalists I've met, it's not like an attack on them as individuals, but I do think we should question whether, whether it's a good thing that there is so much stuff these days about violence and so much stuff about crime. It is everywhere, it's in fiction and in the news and that. And I just think, I think it's partly because there's so much space online and on 24-hour news that anything that will fill a long space is good. So every trial that they can turn into a soap opera, they do. Every violent crime that they can get a few stories out of, they do. And obviously in the case of Meredith Kercher's kind of murder, that's a story that's been going on for 7 years, and they can still sell stories on it.
Just finally, before we open up for a couple of questions, you said earlier on at the beginning that it was very, very important that people didn't leave this film without being reminded that this is the whole basis of this story, this film. The reason it's about is that a young girl, Meredith Kercher, was murdered. You don't go back and reconstruct events beforehand, but you do introduce her as a character. I wonder if you could just talk through how you wanted to introduce her and the importance of that. She has a presence. we just to
clarify that. We don't at all try and speculate on what happened. Because from
that's
the
what I
beginning,
mean. That's very much
from
what I
the
wanted to say,
beginning, it's like, I kind of think it's like a lot of cases, you're never going to know exactly what happened. I think that's why the journalists, to some extent, why the journalists were able to keep their story going for so long, because it could become all about the character of the accused and are they, and what they dressed or how they behaved became more important than the facts of the case, because because clearly those facts are never going to be clear enough to know what happened that night. But obviously, the idea of the film is that this person who's been killed is the love the father has for her specifically, or the love the family have for her. I wanted people to think about that. So obviously, it's about to what extent love can sort of triumph over that absence. So we have scenes where we see her, which is sort of about carried away, like Thomas is imagining what she's like, and part of Cara's role in a way is that she is a kind of version of her in the film, and the version for Thomas of how Meredith would be, or how Elizabeth, the character based on Meredith, would be. But she is quite. I hope she has a big emotional impact in the film. But it's more through people's love for her, not that she's there. And I think these days lots of families, the family relationships, obviously the relationship you have with your brothers and sisters, your parents, and especially your children, are the most important relationships. But a lot of families are spread out. So even in the most mundane way, that a lot of people have to try and keep those relationships going through some sort of absence, like Thomas does with his daughter.
Thank you. We've got time for a few questions. Are there any questions out there in the audience that we can take for Michael Winterbottom? There's one here. There is a microphone coming along. Thank you.
Hi there. My question is, some of your films are based on true life stories and some are purely fiction. Do you ever see a difference when you come in to pick your projects, or do you look for something story-wise? Approach?
I mean, usually there's like some kind of fairly random thing that interests you in the first place, and then gradually the idea of it becomes clearer, and what interests you becomes clearer. And obviously, like lots of projects you work on for a period of time, and then it's not going to happen. I mean, I have done a lot of films based on real stories or real events, but taken into a kind of fictional world. I guess there's something in that area that I like, between the movement between, okay, we know this is based on something that's real, but on the other hand this is fictional, and the crossing over from that border is something I like. Not I don't know why, but but it kind of affects other aspects of filmmaking as well. It's like I like working with mixing between sort of non-actors and proper actors, between having characters in a location, but the rest of the location is kind of going on. It's not obviously to your film. So you're perhaps slightly aware of a shift of the type of storytelling you're in. There's an element that's controlled, there's an element that's random, there's an element that's fiction, an element of fact, and that. So you're perhaps people are having to keep thinking about that a little bit as they watch the film.
Well, I'm going to bring things to a close.
Sure, great.
The Face of an Angel is opening here in the UK on Friday. Thank you very much for the director of the film, Michael Winterbottom. Thank you very much.